Okay, yeah, okay, let's get started. So, hi everyone, welcome to the second field learning webinar hosted by Titan Robotics Club. A little bit information about us is that we are a robotics club from International School Bellevue. We have started doing webinars once every month, and today we'll be focused on the law field. So for today's agenda, we will be hosting a Q&A and ending it all with a conclusion. And today we are joined with not one, but two panelists today. We're excited to introduce you all to Thaddeus Gregory and Zach Delap to you all. Before we continue to the Q&A, I would like to give a brief summary of both panelists today. So starting off, we have Thaddeus, who has intimate knowledge on navigating federal, state, and local land use regulations at HCMP. He graduated from Carleton College and the University of Michigan School of Law. And we also have Zach today, who is an attorney in HCMP's real estate group. And Zach primarily focuses his practice on real estate transactions and dispute resolution. He graduated Pepperdine Caruso School of Law. And now enough with the intro. It is now time to answer all your burning law questions with the amazing panelists.
All right, let's move on to some questions. First of all, what is your current job?
I'll tackle that first. As you might have heard before, I am a land use and environmental law attorney at Hills Clark Martin and Peterson. And essentially what that means is I help, for the most part, developers examine land and figure out what they can do with it, what they can build, how to build it, and get the rights to build what they want to build. At various times, sometimes they can't build something due to existing laws, and our team will help rewrite the laws and work with governments to allow our team to put up buildings.
And I am in the same firm, and I'm in a real estate group. So a lot of what I do is help businesses and developers buy and sell large properties, and then help them create. And I work with Thaddeus and the land use group, among others, to help create a lot of the commercial buildings you'll see in the area, whether it's condos or strip malls or anything else. And then I'll deal with a lot of the legal documentation that has to go with that, like with easements and title reports and different technical things like that.
Okay, does that entail a lot of research or more action?
I'd say less research on my end of things. There's definitely times where the two sides are confused about the legal wording on things, and we might have to research some Supreme Court cases in Washington to figure out how the courts think the language in certain documents should be applied, whether it should go towards this neighbor or this neighbor. But by and large, it's less research and more action.
My practice definitely has a good amount of research. A lot of the research that we do isn't necessarily legal. So while of course we have to keep apprised of what laws surround us in the legal landscape, as we try and put in buildings in different jurisdictions, a lot of the research surrounds what's happening politically. So it's what's the jurisdiction's mayor interested in, what's the city council interested in, what are their goals, and how does our development, or how can our development help the city advance those goals?
All right. Did you find it hard to get a job in law without connections?
It can be. It depends on the market. If you're in an economic downturn, maybe firms aren't hiring as much, like in 2008 and 12. I don't think that was as much of an issue for our class, but I think it depends more on the market than connections. That being said, if you have connections, that's great, right? That can get you right in the door without too much hassle. But if you don't have connections, that's not to say you should worry, right? If you do well in school, if you have good internships, and a good resume, you should be able to land a job. I definitely say to practice your interviewing. That's not something you do regularly. It comes off, to an interviewer if you're more polished or not. So I'd say try to get some interview practice in.
All right. Do you have any other tips for future college graduates besides that?
Sure. To piggyback off of what Zach said, even if you don't have connections currently, that doesn't mean that you can't forge them. So I, for example, took a year off in between undergrad and law school, and I worked for a judge as a campaign manager, and worked at a law firm. So basically, if you don't have the connections, try and look to see how you can build up your stature within the legal community, and see where your existing skills might be able to fit in, even though you're not a lawyer.
All right. Why did you choose to study or practice law in general?
Sure, I'll go first. Growing up, my dad was a lawyer, and so I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I wanted to end up practicing with him, but unfortunately, he left the legal career, or he left being a lawyer before I graduated from law school, so I couldn't work with him. However, I think being a lawyer is just innately pretty interesting. I have a giant passion for politics and understanding how things fit together, understanding how our society is built, and the laws upon which our society is built. And I'm really passionate about community building. And really, being a land use lawyer allows you to be a part of physically building the community. It's so fun to have a tangible output at the end of your work and point to the city skyline and be like, oh yeah, like that skyscraper was us. That's the one that Zach and I, put together. So I find it just absolutely interesting and a great way to stay connected to the ongoings that surround you.
Yeah, I was also very interested in politics, and growing up, I loved arguing, right? So my parents were like, "Oh, you should be a lawyer," and I said, "Okay." So I did mock trial in high school. I don't know if your high school offers mock trial or not, but that was a great experience. And if you're going to college, I'd recommend going to mock trial if you think you might be interested in law school, just because you can do it during college before you actually commit to law school. And it's a good experience, right? It's a little different in that it's specifically in a courtroom setting. Not all lawyers go to court all the time, right? Thaddeus might go to court sometimes for some land use hearings, right? I probably will never go to court in my current role. My last job before this, I did go to court every now and then. But that being said, I think mock trial gives you great experience, and I'd recommend trying it out.
Any recommendations on how someone can figure out what field of law they might find the most interesting for them?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes along with what you like to do or what you're interested in generally, right? So if you have an interest in politics and civics and whatnot of your local city, like Thaddeus was talking about, you might be more interested in land use or real estate. If you are more interested in, say, the environment, then you might be interested in environmental law. If criminal justice reform is really important to you, maybe a criminal defense attorney, things like that. And if you're into robotics, right, and you want to help with patents and other things, then maybe patent law would be good for you. And in that case, it really depends on your major. In undergrad, you'd need to have a bachelor's of science in some sort of electronic or engineering based major if you want to be a patent attorney. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, and to jump on that, most people when they get into law school don't actually know what they want to do. They know that they generally want to be a lawyer, but they don't know what type of law. And in law school, you just get exposed to a bunch of different types of lawyers and how people practice. When I went in, I thought that I might want to do JAG and basically work as an attorney for the military. As it turns out, I help build buildings instead. Very different paths, but just during my journey in law school, I was exposed to what a bunch of different people did, and you know, you learn, you grow. But to what Zach was saying about IP law, if that is something that you're interested in, you definitely need that bachelor's of science. And so robotics, definitely, like some mechanical engineering background. But if you're interested in like biological science, neurobiology, or some sort of like medical biology is useful there.
Okay. What are some challenges you faced in college?
Yeah, sure. So I came in to college wanting to set the world on fire and do everything. So I played varsity baseball, and I played in our college's jazz band, and that took up a ton of time. I like never had any free time, and my grades slipped a little bit because, you know, I'd wake up early in the morning to go lift for baseball and have like, you know, hours of practice, and then have to go practice for jazz band for a few hours, and that left very little time to pursue my studies. So I had to really improve my time management skills and realize that I couldn't do everything. And so things had to drop by the wayside. But if I could do it over again, I think I'd come in still trying to do the same thing, but realize that, you know, if I want to pursue music, it doesn't have to be through the jazz band itself. You know, make friends, and you can just go to their place, and when you have free time, you know, hang out with them. If you want to make music with them, make music with them, or do whatever you want to do.
Okay.
I came into law school thinking that, you know, I wanted to go into politics later on after law school. And that changed over time as priorities change, right? When you get older, things change. And I realized that's not what I wanted to do. But, you know, by then I'd already majored in political science and international relations. And nobody's like, a lot of people might not agree with what I'm about to say, but even if you're interested in things like politics or international relations, you don't necessarily have to major in those things. You can still do those with any major. And I think bachelor's of political science, for most people, it's going to be a waste of time and money. So don't do that, okay? Even if you want to be a lawyer, most lawyers probably majored in political science like I did, but you don't have to, and it's not useful, I don't think. The most useful major, realistically, for a law school student, unless you want to be in robotics and patent law, right? Then you have to get a bachelor's of science. Otherwise, for general lawyers, I think something like English or creative writing. So you have to do research and writing a lot, right, in law school. I think those majors really help a lot. But otherwise, you know, if you're not interested in those things, I'd steer clear of political science, maybe go more towards finance or economics or general business, things like that, that you can actually use outside of just the practice of law.
All right. Do you guys have any other tips besides those for future college students?
I think a lot of what college is about is trying different things to see what you like and kind of who you want to be, right? So there's clubs for everything. Or if there isn't and you're interested in, you can make that club. So I'd say try out lots of different clubs, see what you're into, and try to broaden that as you grow older. You can always change your major too, right? If you start out as math and you decide, you know what, I'd rather be English, that's okay. You can always switch. That being the case too, I think there's a predisposition for people who go straight to four-year colleges like me, that community college isn't as good, right? And you may have a negative thought about people who went to community college for anything. I'd say leave that behind. Try not to have that mindset, because people go to community college for a lot of different reasons, right? It's not because they're not smart. And there's also good teachers at community college. Maybe not every teacher, but there are good teachers there. So if you're in school for, say, a year and you decide, you know, my school's on the East Coast, but I'm in Seattle for the summer, you can take community college classes in the summer. I don't think it's worth it to fly out to your college like I did to go to summer school there. I wish I had just taken local community college classes, because you still get college credit for them. And they, in some cases, might be more worth it than the actual college class. So I'd say keep that in mind.
For me, I think that picking the right college is really important. I ended up going to a small 2,000 person college in rural Minnesota. And for me, I know that if I had gone to a larger school, I would have ended up partying quite a bit. And I'm not sure how well I would have done in school, and how that would have set me up to get into law school. So definitely knowing yourself in high school a little bit, and sort of thinking about, if I put myself in this environment, you know, what might happen to me compared to a different environment. And then also just, this might be super cliche, but like, be yourself. You have passions, you know what those passions are. Don't, like, if you're nerdy, like, don't be afraid to be nerdy in college. It's college, like, that's where nerds go. If you want to, like, nerd out on something and find other people who are interested in it. I'm sure that there are other people who share your interests. So follow your interests. You know, you end up doing your best work and you're passionate about it. And so find your passion and pursue it.
All right. Now let's move on some questions from the chat. Okay. International law is a thing, right? Is there any notes about that field that not many people know?
So yeah, international law is definitely a thing. So international law is often tied to other types of law, so like corporate law, business law, or laws regarding, I guess, international treaties, which can be tied to environmental law, or to, like, I guess, land use law, right? But getting jobs in those fields ends up more or less positioning you in very few places in the world, unless you go work for, say, like the UN, and you work for a specific country. This is to say that essentially in the United States, you're forced to work more or less in either LA, New York, or DC. And then in Europe, it's going to be London, Switzerland, or at times Austria and Germany. But really, like, you become pretty limited. Obviously, knowing a second language is very useful. The other route to international law is doing government law for specific countries. So I have a friend who's working on expanding constitutions for certain African countries, which sounds absolutely amazing, but he's like, I can't reach him ever because he's on odd hours and lives in a rural part of a country without super good Wi-Fi. So international law can definitely be interesting, but it's normally tied to some other type of law.
Yeah, another thought there, if you would rather live somewhere not in the places that is just said, right? Or, you know, in the main Asian countries where that would be a thing. If you say wanted to live in San Francisco, Seattle, right, or somewhere else, you could still work at a firm that does more local law, but there are pro bono organizations which do have international law components to it. So you could still work on international law matters, just not as your main practice.
Also, I completely omitted Singapore and Hong Kong, though the situation with Hong Kong is a little bit interesting right now. I had some friends working there who had to leave, but hopefully it comes back.
Yeah. Okay. At this point in your career, how do you see yourself moving forward?
So I started out reverse of what most lawyers these days do. Most lawyers these days go to a firm first. They make clerk for a judge and first, but then they'll go to a law firm. And then a lot of the lawyers will go in-house. So they'll work for a company, right? After they've worked at a law firm for 2 to 5-ish years, depending on the company who, they want different amounts of experience in different areas of law. And the reason they do that is law firms have a reputation of having long hours, high pay, but long hours, and not much work-life balance. Versus when you go in-house to a company, the thought is that you have maybe lower pay, but a lot more free time, right? It's more of like an 8 to 5 job, and you don't work weekends, you don't work nights or holidays, and you can have more time with your family. So I had the opportunity to do the reverse of that. I started out at a company that hired people straight out of law school, and it was exactly what I just said. It was lower pay, but also a lot lower hours. And it was nice, in terms of hours to work less. I had to live in Omaha, Nebraska. I don't know if anybody has experience with that. I'd never been to Omaha, Nebraska. It's in the middle of the country. It's a very different experience. I'm from California originally, and it was good to a certain extent, but I got tired of it and it got boring. So I decided to move to Seattle, and I got the job at the firm I'm currently at. My thought on that is it's a lot more interesting doing things at a firm than when you're at a company. Generally, when you're at a company, you're limited to only doing things within a very narrow scope, right? So if you're only working for Costco doing real estate leases, that's all you ever do, you're gonna get bored fairly quick. When you're at a firm, you can do a lot more stuff. You have a lot more autonomy to do what you want. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't have any plans to go anywhere anytime soon. So yeah. So how about you, Thaddeus?
That's a good question. So this is my first legal job or job as a lawyer. And what led me here was, a passion for politics and a passion for community building. And I did that working as a campaign manager and then volunteering on various people's campaigns throughout the state. I love my job because I essentially get to do the same political work, except I get paid a ton more, and get to work for really cool clients and get to diversify like the political people who I work with. So I really like my firm. It's a great place to work. Our firm prides itself on being more as an 8 to 5 firm than most places, and prides itself on having a great culture. And so far, it's proven to be pretty true.
Yeah, and so something I'll say on that, it's not always true that your firm's going to be long hours and no life. And it's not always true that a company is going to be low hours and lots of life, right? I know people who work as lawyers for Amazon, they have no life, right? So, and I know people who work for firms who have a lot of life, right? This firm, like Thaddeus said, has a lot better work-life balance than a lot of companies that I know about. So just keep that in mind.
And sorry, one more caveat. If you go into law in like New York, you're just not gonna have a life. And that's just across the board. You'll make a ton of money, but no life.
You might not even make a ton of money. I have a friend who's not making a ton of money, and he works longer hours than us. So don't go to New York. If you're going to be a lawyer, don't go to New York.
Okay, I see that we're running pretty close on time. Do either of you guys have to go?
No, we have till 4.
Oh, okay. Okay, next question then. What's the difference between general practice lawyers and lawyers that focus on like a specific topic?
Go ahead.
Sure. So general practice means that you more or less you don't specify in any one field. So within the law, of course, there's a ton of different fields. There's like criminal, which would be like criminal defense. There's divorce lawyers, real estate lawyers, land use lawyers, business lawyers. General practice normally sticks around the most common areas of law that affect normal people. So that would be something like bankruptcy, criminal, trust and estates, which is like writing wills, and divorce. So essentially you get a full splattering of stuff. Zach and I specialize, which means that I focus and I spend pretty much my entire day looking at land use issues and environmental issues. Zach, I think spends most of his day, if not all of his day, looking at real estate issues. So you get a ton of practice in one area, so you can specialize in it.
Yeah, and that being said, if you're a specialist like we are, that doesn't mean you can't do other things. So I intentionally try to spend some of my time doing wills and trusts, just so I can have that experience. And I'd say more often than not, if you're looking at a firm with several employees, people are going to specialize, versus if you look at firms with like 1 or 2 attorneys, they might just be general practice attorneys.
Okay, is one of them harder than the other?
I mean, I don't think so, right? I think it's how in depth you get into things. So specialists will get a lot more in depth, generally speaking, than somebody who's just a general practice attorney in specific topics. So in that sense, yes, it's harder because those are more complicated topics. But at the same time, I don't know how to do some of the stuff that general practice people know how to do, because that's what they do.
Okay, another question. Do lawyers write laws, lobby for laws, or represent or implement laws?
All of the above. So I have written laws, I have lobbied for laws, and I've, well, the implementing laws is more so the role of the legislature. So I suppose that our role is we'll write a law and we'll try and get council members or our state House and Senate to jump on board with the laws that we've written, talk to mayors and say, hey, this will help you. You should support it. And so that's the lobbying part. For the implementation, normally we'll just go to council meetings, speak on behalf of it, and say, this is how it's going to help the public. This is how, these are all the reasons why, the public should support it, and just hope that we were convincing and charming enough to allow the legislature to pass it.
Nice. Okay. How realistic is the law practice we see in media and movies and stuff?
This much. They act like, they actually go to court for things, but not in the way they do in TV shows. Most TV shows, I feel like they're at a law firm, right? And they're like, oh, this lawsuit just got filed. Oh, we're going to trial next week, right? That's not how it works. You're gonna have probably months, if not years, in some places like LA where things are way backed up before you go to trial. And there's a lot of rules on timing and how you share documents and information that aren't shown at all in TV shows, right? And you can't just surprise drop something like a surprise witness who's going to blow the whole thing wide open at the trial. You can't do that. So not much.
Yeah, and inaccurate representation would be just like me sitting at my desk for hours on end. That would make horrible TV.
Yeah, well, so that being the case, if you're interested in like criminal justice type things, it's going to be very different from what Thaddeus and I do. If you're interested in those things, you can go intern at a DA's office or public defender's office as a college student. You can't speak in the courtroom because you're not in law school yet, and you haven't taken the classes you need for that. But you can at least get an idea of what their life is like and realize that their life is very different than anybody in a law firm. They have dozens and dozens of cases, and they're very busy. Going to trial, at least trial prep and conferences and meetings a lot. So if you want that lifestyle, I'd suggest interning with one of those offices.
Okay. Do you guys recommend going straight into law school after getting your undergrad or getting work experience first?
I do not recommend going straight to law school. I don't know if that's what you did, Thaddeus. No offense. Okay, but I didn't. And I feel like those of us in my class who didn't go straight from undergrad to law school had an easier time in law school than people who went straight through. And I don't know if that's because people who went straight through maybe were a little burnt out of schooling, and when they got to law school, it was overwhelming because there's a lot of reading and research. But for those of us who took some time off in between, we were, I think, refreshed. And I think that by working in between the two a little bit, and I didn't work too much, right? I worked, I don't know, I did 6 months at a DA's office after undergrad, and then a few other months working before going to law school. But I think that learning more about the real world helps with parts of law school that you don't get if you're only in school, if you don't have that exposure to the real world. So that is something I'd suggest too. Even in undergrad, you might want to get a part-time job doing something in the real world. It could be on campus. I think something in retail really helps. Expose you to different people and humbles you a little bit, and makes you a better person overall. So I'd suggest doing something like that that's not related to law, just to get some real world experience.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna second what Zach just said. I was a waiter for like 2 months, and it was by far the worst job I've ever had, but taught me so much, and definitely humbling, and just great real world experience. There's also a practical aspect of going straight through. It means that you have to study for the LSAT while you're in your senior year. That's just like a lot of extra work during senior year, which isn't very fun. If you do undergrad, well, a lot of people set up their undergrad so their senior year is a little bit light and fluffy and fun, and studying for the LSAT is none of the three.
Okay, you guys talked about this a little bit earlier, about like what job you guys do, but what does your like everyday job look like?
Like Patty said, just sitting in an office at a computer. Pretty much is most of the day. But what that means differs by the day, right? What projects we're working on. So it'll depend on the firm you're at, or if you're in-house somewhere. But you'll have a range of clients. There'll be some small clients, and there'll be some very large international organizations that you might be helping. And what those two entities or people need are very different, and that can change what you do from Monday to Tuesday. But you're at a computer, right? Either way. Now, non-COVID times, there are networking events, and there are times where you do go into the field and you might visit the building that you're help building, or you might visit, right, the piece of land that your client might be buying or selling. But by and large, you're going to be in an office. you know, you could be, a lot of the day is emails. And then otherwise you're reviewing documents or drafting documents of one form or another.
I'll add to that. I spend about 5 to 10 hours each week going to different legislative hearings. So I'll check in to see to like a council meeting in jurisdictions that I'm working in a lot or that we're doing something very contentious in. I'll go to the planning commission meetings. And so essentially you're just in non-COVID times, you're just sitting there until sometimes like 12 o'clock at night, listening to people. Often, is this being recorded? It's being recorded. You're sitting there listening to wonderful community members share their ideas about how they want their communities to look, whether you agree with that or not. And you know, part of it is just understanding, like, is that something that you enjoy? Is that something you don't enjoy? I like it. I nerd out on it. It's interesting to see different people's beliefs about how our society should look. But so when I'm not in front of a screen, I'm in front of a group of people, normally angrily discussing what's wrong with their communities.
Sounds pretty tiring. Okay, what has been your favorite project or law that you've worked on so far?
I don't know if we can get into specifics on deals because of confidentiality, but I'd say generally speaking, things that I really enjoy are when you have a really complex project and maybe it seems a little overwhelming at first, but then you start to chip away at it and you realize, you know, I can actually do this. And you get to a point where it's substantially finished and you're like, wow, like, that was really complicated last month or last week or whatever, but now I understand it. And next time it comes around, you might be, you know, the expert on it because you got through it. I'd say, you know, that's something that's rewarding and it's a good feeling.
Yeah, I can't get into specifics yet, but like at the beginning of COVID, I spent a lot of time helping companies sort of navigate COVID laws, and so I'm like every day looking at proclamations that were coming out and answering questions about that. And it was just cool to be able to be on like the front lines of helping people navigate these novel issues and sort of figure out how they could still conduct their business or still, you know, succeed in a time where it was really hard to.
Yeah, and I'll say, like Thaddeus said earlier, when you drive by a building or site and you're like, hey, like I helped make that a building, right? That's a cool feeling too.
Okay. If you could remove any law, what would you choose and why?
So this is being recorded. So the laws are good. Also, yeah. I think my hands are sort of tied.
It's a weird question. I don't know what to say to that one.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Zach, you have a personal question. In your bio, you mentioned you were trained in dispute resolution. How were you trained in this? Was it a course or experience? And what role does it play in your work?
Yeah. So where I went to law school is Pepperdine. It's in Malibu. It's north of LA in California. And they have an institute within Pepperdine called the Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution. And Strauss, well, Pepperdine is ranked, I think internationally as one of the top dispute resolution schools in, I guess, in the world. But I think it competes with Harvard generally as like 1 or 2. And they have, I think you can get a master's. You can get a master's in dispute resolution if you'd like, but they do just certificate programs where you train in negotiation and mediation and arbitration and different classes around that. So I did that, while I was at Pepperdine. I think it's really helpful in the negotiation context. And even though Thaddeus and I aren't going to court and negotiating with somebody else, like a district attorney and a public defender might do with each other, we still negotiate with buyers and sellers of the other side, right? And a lot of that comes down to how you negotiate and skills and training. So I think that's really helpful in that context. In my last job, I did a lot of mediations. And if you don't know what mediations are in a courtroom, essentially, if somebody sues somebody else and you go to court, before you actually go to a trial, you'll most likely have the opportunity to have a neutral third party hear both sides of the argument and hear evidence without evidence rules that will apply in court applying. And the parties will try to talk it out through that third party to reach an agreement before they have to go to trial. So I did a lot of those, and I think that the dispute resolution program helped a lot with that. So, you don't have to go get a master's in it, but I think it's useful at whatever school you go to take a negotiation class or classes if they offer it.
Okay, nice. What does the path to law school look like? How many years do you need to study?
You don't need to study really to get to law school other than the LSAT like Thaddeus was talking about. And a lot of that comes down to your test taking abilities. If you're a whiz at taking tests, you might not need to study that much. You might just be able to take the test and ace it. If you have more trouble test taking, you'll have to study more. It'll just depend on the person. And we talked about earlier about intellectual property. So if you want to be a patent attorney, you need that bachelor's in engineering or something to be able to do that. So that would be all 4 years, I guess, of your undergrad. But otherwise, it's just that LSAT.
I'll add for the LSAT. It's useful to actually be decent in math. There's an entire section of the LSAT that's essentially just like logic problems, and math is just logic. So if you're decent at math, you can normally do pretty well in that section. And it's the only section of the LSAT that you can be absolutely assured in the moment that you got the right answer.
All right. What is the bar and what role does it play into becoming a lawyer?
Great. I have wonderful feelings on this. First, the bar is absolute. I disagree with needing the bar. So the bar is essentially a test that allows you to become like officially a lawyer within the bar. The bar is the field of lawyers within any given state, including the federal jurisdictions and our Supreme Court. So there's a Supreme Court bar if you want to practice in front of the United States Supreme Court. There's federal district bars, and then there's state bars. You don't have to take specific tests for the Supreme Court or the federal judiciary, I don't think. They do have to have recommendations from various lawyers. But essentially the bar is a general knowledge test that tests you on basically anything that could come up. For what I do, nothing of what I do appeared on the bar. I will, unless I have a giant change in my career, ever apply anything that I learned for the bar. So essentially, I think it's just a unnecessary hurdle for people to become lawyers. Zach might have some different feelings on it.
I mean, you use like contracts, principles and stuff, I guess, right? No,
like not what we learned for the bar. Like I feel like the bar is like very general, not like how to draft a contract.
Yeah, no, I'd say a lot of what I said I agree with too. The bar differs in different states. A lot of states now are doing the uniform bar exam, the UBE, and Washington is one of them. And that is basically an effort to make all the states, uniform in that. And so when you go to California, well, California's not going to be in the UBE probably anytime soon because they want to be special. I'm from California, right? So I can say that. But the idea is if you're in Washington and you go practice in Colorado, you'll know generally kind of, I guess, what the laws are like, right? Because they're more uniform. They're not exactly the same, right? They're going to have different laws in different states, and you're going to have to learn those if you switch. But generally speaking, you know the idea of what it should be. So the bar exam generally is broken up between multiple choice questions, 1 day of multiple choice questions, or half a day of it, and then legal research and writing portion, which is where they give you a little booklet, and it has narrative, and it has fake laws that they wrote for that test, and then you have to answer essay questions on those fake laws and that narrative. I think that portion of the test is actually worthwhile, and I think that should remain a portion of the bar because that's what you do as a lawyer, right? And so that could separate those who can and can't function in that respect as a lawyer. The multiple choice test, I agree with that, is we don't really need it. When you're a lawyer, you don't have to memorize everything. You don't need to know things on the spot. You have time to research it because laws change, and you'll have to look things up just to make sure you're current on whatever the laws are.
Okay, and Thaddeus, this is a personal question. The asker just finished a unit about land use and management in their environmental science class. What work are you doing as a lawyer to handle environmental issues on our land?
Sure. So land use and environmental law work hand in hand, especially in Washington and especially in Western United States states. So in Washington, we have something called SEPA, the State Environmental Protection Act. And basically, whenever my clients want to build a building, they have to go through a SEPA checklist in which they have to provide detailed information about how their project will affect the environment. And it's not just for buildings that they want to put in, it's for different uses. So let's say you had a shopping mall that you wanted to convert into a movie theater, you would have to do an additional SEPA review to see the additional cars that would have to go come in and how that would affect the carbon output. It also affects laws. So laws that affect how people interact with the earth, or might cause more cars on the road. You have to do an environmental analysis to see how those laws will affect the earth. So basically, a lot of what I do is to walk our clients through that process and look to see how their buildings and their work affects the environment. Also, unfortunately, I have to take off for a negotiation with the city. So great to meet all of you. Best of luck. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions about being a lawyer. And yeah, have a wonderful week. Bye, friends.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we had one more question, but we can still send that to them. What?
I can answer that last top 3 skills.
Okay.
So I'd say for being a good lawyer, no matter what kind of lawyer you are, you need to be analytical, right? You need to ask why, not just accept things. Because a lot of lawyering comes down, like I said before, to negotiation, regardless of what kind of law you're doing. So if somebody says to you, I'm not going to agree to this, that's it, right? You need to understand why they don't agree to things, because a lot of times you can work it out with them once you understand the why. So I'd say that you should, I think, be inquisitive too, and I think to a certain extent you need to be determined and not basically be willing to give up too easily on things. Just because if you do, you're gonna be a rug, right? So everybody will know when they come against you, they're gonna get whatever they want. So you can't let that happen. But that being said, you don't want to be a wall either, right? You need some things to pass through. So I'd say trying to figure out what the most reasonable balance on different things is important.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we can move on to Abraham for the conclusion.
So if there are any questions you'd like to ask us or the panelists, feel free to reach out to them or us. For any more updates, we have an Instagram account. You can access the recordings of this webinar and the previous one on YouTube. We hope you enjoyed and helped galvanize something within you to pursue this field. And this is brought to you by the Titan Robotics Club. And thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.